Hello to everyone in the internet. It is currently Moon Day, January 14th. I am Nathan of Washington, and you are watching Culture Shock, the only show on the internet that knows how to separate an issue of culture from an issue of politics. And this is the news. Alright, so recently Mecca, the giant super mosque, the original mosque, was invaded by deadly insects. This is literally like something like straight out of the Bible. A bizarre event, for sure, and I'm sure it's something that quack spiritualists will make a huge deal out of. Look, you can't just go around calling everything you don't understand spirituality. I believe in spirituality. Hell, I'm into secular theosophy and transcendental meditation. Cool stuff. But at the same time, if you encounter something that you don't quite understand, logically you should try and sort of, I guess what I'm trying to say is you should try and exhaust all natural explanations first, just to be safe. But quack spiritualists who turn everything to spirituality and come up with all sorts of nonsense that is not real spirituality, of course they're going to make a big deal out of it. They're going to be, oh, it's the curse of God, the curse of God. Except insects are a normal phenomenon, although not necessarily on this scale. It doesn't mean it's automatically spiritual. What you do is you examine all the natural explanations first, and if none of those have sufficient explanatory power to explain what the event was, then you can go to spirituality. But not before. And of course, as the cliche goes, these were locusts. And they were basically everywhere, in schools and homes, swarming all over people, and on everything. And on everything inside of the mosque. Now here's the thing. Here's the way I look at it. They said that these things just came in undetected, like real fast, like. No one even noticed the swarm approach. Just because no one noticed it doesn't mean they didn't have a natural approach. People fail to notice things all the time. In fact, in my experience, human beings can be legendarily unobservant. That's kind of why, sneaking around somewhere works. Because people tend not to notice shit. Humans are legendarily unattentive. Which is really quite amazing in its own way. If you ever needed a logical reason to know that human beings are simply quote-unquote not predatory, we are not predators, that would be it. Because predators are more attentive. I guarantee if you had like a bunch of cats in there, the cats would have noticed the locusts. Of course, they probably would have got devoured by the locusts too. Because that's kind of what they do. They swarm over things. It said many of the pilgrims in Mecca had bugs all over them. I guarantee you the locusts were trying to devour their flesh. That is something they do. Bottom line is, if locusts have gone on long enough without something to eat, they'll pretty much just eat anything they can fit into their damn mouths. Bottom line is, I would say this was most likely just a typical locust migration. And that for whatever reason, they just didn't notice. Probably because they were just too busy going on about their day. Like maybe the locusts were coming in at like an angle that was just high enough. Like, are you looking at the sky constantly? No, of course not. If they're high up enough, of course you would fail to notice them. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Often the simplest explanation is the best one. Or in this case, just whatever has the most explanatory power. That is perfect. They ride high, so you don't notice them. You know, they're flying really high in the sky, and you don't notice them because you're too busy going about your day. And they're too far away for them to make any audible noise that you'll be able to hear. And then they just descend on the city before it's too late. Nice and simple. They were just migrating from somewhere else. Probably, they were trying to escape the cold. Because insects migrate too. Insects and birds both migrate. They literally had to assemble 22 teams of 138 people. using precisely 111 pieces of specialized equipment to clean up all the insects. I mean, yeah, it looks like a biblical plague, but it can easily be explained. But it's still a pretty crazy event. Sometimes the world is a very random place, and sometimes things happen just because they can. Yves Cochet, a, quote, French MP, wants the French people to stop having babies to make room for migrants. Yves Cochet is not French because he's a traitor to his own people. That's how I see it. He's betrayed his people by making this declaration. No, I'm not French, so you're probably saying, well, why do you care so much? You almost sound like a Frenchie. Well, no, I don't have to be French to recognize that when someone betrays their own people, then you can't really call them a part of that people anymore, can you? Once you've made that betrayal? Bottom line, he's a traitor to his own people, so he can't be French anymore. Probably racially, ethnically, but not ideologically or politically. Bottom line is, at this point, a French Civil War is pretty much inevitable. And guys like Yves Cochet are going to be like at the heart of it. If America had a guy like Yves Cochet hanging around, he'd probably get his ass lynched for saying shit like that, I'm sure. He'd get hung up with a rope, while the leftists would be treating him like some kind of martyr. I no longer recognize the French government, and honestly, I encourage the rest of you out there to do the same. They have lost all legitimacy with this nonsense. The riots were started over something completely legitimate, but rather than be reasonable and capitulate to their perfectly reasonable demands, they got all despotic and shit. They started corralling them with police officers and doing all sorts of messed up bullshit. Now he's saying this nonsense, plus violating the nation's own sovereignty. The French military literally declared Emmanuel Macron guilty of treason. I mean, how much more clear does it got to be? The French government has literally no legitimacy to it whatsoever anymore. It's time to replace the damn thing. It's rotten and full of holes. It's like a moldy piece of cheese. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I'm going to read you an article now about how a chemical weapons expert may have in fact been murdered. New evidence shows chemical weapons expert Dr. Kelly was murdered. Damning new evidence reveals that Tony Blair's chemical weapons expert Dr. David Kelly didn't commit suicide but may have been murdered. Over 15 years have passed since Dr. David Kelly was found dead in Oxfordshire Wood, shortly after disputing Tony Blair's claim that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. DailyMail.co.uk reports the official explanation was that the distinguished weapons expert had taken his own life by overdosing on painkillers. What is he, a pro wrestler? and getting his left wrist devastated after being unmasked, as the source of the BBC's claim that the government had sexed up the case for the Iraq War. But since Dr. Kelly's death in 2003, time has done nothing to dispel the cloud of suspicion that hangs over the episode. The troubling questions surrounding it have only increased as the years have passed. Successive governments have refused to allow a full coroner's inquest to be held, feeling the sense of a cover-up. I have spent years examining the case, and like some surgeons, barristers, coroners, and judges I know of, I cannot accept the official explanation that Dr. Kelly took his own life. Last year I published a book containing the evidence I had discovered since then. I have amassed more compelling information from new, highly credible sources, evidence which casts yet more serious doubt on the claim that Dr. Kelly cut his own wrists. It also raises further disturbing questions about the circumstances of his death. By continuing my investigation, I have sometimes been dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, but I have no political axe to grind, and there is nothing fantastical about the facts of this case. The 59-year-old scientist's body was discovered on July 18, 2003, after he had been grilled publicly in front of a select committee of MPs about his contact with the BBC journalist Andrew Gilligan. Gilligan had reported that the government dossier which claimed Iraq could deploy weapons of mass destruction at 45 minutes' notice was unreliable, exaggerated, or sexed up for political purposes. I'm assuming the sexed up meant that they made it look sexy, that they made it look, good and convincing, in other words. More in the colloquial sense. Dr. Kelly, a chemical weapons expert who worked for the Foreign Office and Ministry of Defense, was soon unmasked by Downing Street officials as the BBC's informant. He's always denied being the main source of the story, but was nonetheless thrust into the spotlight against his will. Less than an hour after Dr. Kelly's body was discovered, and before it had been formally identified or seen by a medical professional who could estimate a cause of death, Blair instructed his Lord Chancellor and old friend for university, Charles Falconer, to set up a public inquiry into the circumstances surrounding his death. Lord Hutton was handpicked to the chair of the inquiry, which eventually concluded that Dr. Kelly took his life and cleared the government of wrongdoing. But the establishment of the Hutton inquiry ensured the microscopic investigation of the death, which would have happened during a coroner's inquest, never took place, whereas the coroner would have had formal powers the Hutton inquiry had none. Witnesses could not be compelled to attend. No evidence was given on oath, and Hutton had total control over who would appear and what Democrats could be disclosed. What documents, pardon. The result in the eyes of many was a whitewash. I hate that word. In his report, Hutton concluded that Dr. Kelly had taken his life and that nobody could have anticipated this. He stated that the principal cause of death was bleeding from incised wounds to his left wrist, which Dr. Kelly had inflicted on himself with a knife found beside his body. He said that Dr. Kelly had coronary heart disease, that there were co-proximal painkillers in his blood, and that these things might have helped bring about death more certainly and more rapidly. Hutton then added, "I am further satisfied that no other person was involved in the death of Dr. Kelly, and that Dr. Kelly was not suffering from any significant mental illness at the time he took his own life. I have updated my book after being contacted by John Schur, a world-renowned consultant surgeon specializing in vascular surgery on veins and arteries. He does not believe it possible that Dr. Kelly died in the manner officially found. Schur told me that Dr. Kelly's half-sister, Sarah Pape OBE, a leading plastic surgeon based at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Newcastle, rang him shortly after Hutton published his report in January 2004 to say she didn't believe Dr. Kelly had taken his own life." Schur told me Sarah Pape clearly had concerns about whether Dr. Kelly could have died from slashing his wrist. We had an in-depth conversation about it. She took the trouble to contact me after the Hutton inquiry finished to discuss whether one could actually die from slashing the ulnar artery, which passes through the wrist on the little finger side. She doubted whether he could have done that on a personal and on a medical level. She is a plastic surgeon and has considerable medical knowledge. Schur's claim is doubly significant because Miss Pape gave evidence to the Hutton inquiry but did not disclose her doubts on that occasion. Schur has his own significant professional doubts too. Remember, he's an expert when it comes to blood vessels. He said, "I don't believe it's possible to die from simply cutting your ulnar artery. It is a very small artery, and it is unlikely you could lose enough blood to cause cardiac arrest and death. It is much more likely he died from another cause, one possibly as a heart attack caused by whatever reason, and this was an attempt to mask that." Yeah, a lot of people think that you can just kill yourself by slitting the wrist. But yeah, as someone who's into some pretty, shall we say, well, let's just say what it is. I am sort of a blood freak. I like facts about blood, and even kind of like the taste of my own blood. When I get a little cut, I stick it right in my mouth, and you know how your saliva can cauterize the wound and help it close. You're actually supposed to stick it right in your mouth. It's a sort of a natural healing mechanism, but I actually kind of like the taste of my own blood, and I like facts related to blood. Yeah, I know. I'm a freak. Anyway, the relative absence of blood at the scene and the fact that a rather blunt knife was used are significant. Gee, you think? If one were to cut the wrist holding the knife in the right hand, the artery that would be cut is not the ulnar artery, which is on the inside of the hand, but the radical artery on the outside of the hand. Radical, dude! Oh wait, no, it's radial. That's twice today that I've misread something as bad as that. Wow, I got a problem. It seems more probable that somebody else took the knife and actually slashed the wrist, taking the stroke across the ulnar artery. Sker's point is that anyone wanting to cut their wrist would have first come across the radial artery located under... Yeah. So we get the general picture. But in conclusion, here are some urgent questions that remain unaddressed. Why incomplete evidence concerning Dr. Kelly's whereabouts during the last week of his life was given to the Hutton Inquiry? Yeah, why wasn't there more info there? They should have been able to come up with that easily. Why the forensic pathologist who conducted the post-mortem claimed Dr. Kelly was lighter than he actually was. Why a police search helicopter with thermal imaging equipment, which had flown 3 hours before over the wood where his body was eventually found, did not detect it, despite the fact that his body temperature would have been warm enough at the time to register on the helicopter's search system. Awfully suspicious, I would say. I'd say it's a murder cover-up for sure. Absolutely. All part of that false flag to justify the war in Iraq. And yet another article. This leaked Hillary Clinton email killed 500,000 innocent people. A Hillary Clinton memo that WikiLeaks released in 2016 led to the death of over 560,000 innocent men, women, and children in Syria. The memo takes us back to 2012 in the early phase of the Syrian war. ConsortiumNews.com reports at that point it was largely an internal affair, although Saudi arms shipments were playing a greater and greater role in bolstering rebel forces. But once the Obama administration decided in favor of intervention, the conflict was quickly international, as thousands of holy warriors flooded in from as far away as Western China. The 1,200-word memo by then Secretary of State Clinton begins with the subject of Iran, an important patron of Syria. She dismisses any notion that nuclear tasks will stop Iran from improving the crucial part of any nuclear weapons program, the capability to enrich uranium. If it does get the bomb, it goes on, Israel will suffer a strategic setback since it will no longer be able to respond to provocations with conventional military strikes on Syria and Lebanon, as it can today. Deny the ability to bomb at will, Israel might leave off secondary targets and strike at the main enemy instead. Consequently, Clinton argues that the U.S. should topple the Assad regime so as to weaken Iran and allay the fears of Israel, which has long regarded the Islamic Republic as its primary enemy, as the memo puts it. Bringing down Assad would not only be a massive boon to Israel's security, it would also ease Israel's understandable fear of losing its nuclear monopoly, and Israel and the United States might be able to develop a common view of when the Iranian program is so dangerous that military action could be warranted. I'm sorry, there's only one people that have the right to overthrow a government, and that is the people that the government governs. Bottom line is, no one has the right to overthrow Assad except Assad's own people. Oh, it's a threat to Israel's security. So what? It's not your fucking country. Don't get the fuck involved. Stay the fuck out. If Assad should be overthrown, then his own people should do it. At their own beckoning, not by your accord. This document making the case to arm Syria rebels may have been largely overlooked because of the dates which appear to be inaccurate. One line gives the time as 2001, January 1st at 3 o'clock a.m., even though Clinton was still a New York senator-elect at that point. That date is also out of sync with the timeline of nuclear diplomacy with Iran. Highly suspicious. Another contains a State Department case and document number and a date of November 30th, 2015. That's incorrect as well, since it postdates Clinton's resignation as Secretary of State by better than 2.5 years. Central to the Great Debate. Consequently, anyone stumbling across the memo in the WikiLeaks archives would have no idea of how its rather loopy logic figures in the great debate about whether to use force to bring down Syria President Bashir al-Assad. But textual clues provide an answer. The second paragraph refers to nuclear talks with Iran that began in Istanbul this April and will continue in Baghdad in May. Events that took place in 2012, the sixth invokes an interview with CNN's Christian Amanpour, conducted with then Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak last week, since the interview took place on April 19, 2012. The memo can therefore be dated to the fourth week in April. This is shortly before Clinton joined forces with then CIA Director David Petraeus to push for an aggressive program of rebel military aid. Needless to say, Clinton's skepticism about negotiating with Iran proved to be unwarranted, since Iran eventually agreed to shut down its nuclear program. The memo thus illustrates her hawkishness, along with her conviction that Israeli security trumps all other considerations even if it means setting fire to a region that's been burned over more than once. But the memo illustrates much else besides Clinton's recklessness. Her lack of realism and her almost mystical belief that everything will fall neatly into place once the United States flexes its muscle. Overthrowing Assad would be nothing less than transformative. Iran would be strategically isolated, unable to exert its influence in the Middle East. The resulting regime in Syria will see the United States as a friend, not an enemy. Washington would gain substantial recognition as fighting for the people in the Arab world, not the corrupt regimes. For Israel, the rationale for a bolt from the blue attack on Iran's nuclear facilities would be eased, and a new Syrian regime might well be open to early action on the frozen peace talks with Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon would be cut off from its Iranian sponsor, since Syria would no longer be a transit point for Iranian training assistance and missiles. It was a low-cost, high-payoff approach, she writes, that would eliminate... Oh, wait, hold on. It was a low, high-cost payoff approach, she writes, that would eliminate one enemy, weaken two more, and generate such joy amongst ordinary Syrians that peace talks between Damascus and Tel Aviv will spring back to life. Boing, 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 boing. The risks were nil, since the Libyan operation had no long-lasting consequences for the region. The memo says, referring to the overthrow of strongman Muammar Gaddafi 6 months earlier, the Syrian operation couldn't either. Some argue that U.S. involvement risks a wider war with Russia, but the Kosovo example, in which NATO bombed Russian ally Serbia, shows otherwise. In that case, Russia had genuine ethnic and political ties to the Serbs, which don't exist between Russia and Syria. And even then, Russia did little more than complain. Russian officials have already acknowledged they won't stand in the way if intervention comes. So there was nothing to worry about. 65 years of Arab-Israeli conflict would fall by the wayside while Russia remains safely marginalized. How it really turned out. Needless to say, that's not how things turned out. At that moment, Libya seemed under control. But 3 or 4 months later, it would explode as Western-backed Islamist militias blasted away at one another, imposing strict Sharia law, reinstituting slavery, and rolling back decades of social progress. Oh, by the by, the word Sharia apparently just means law, so every time you're saying Sharia law, you're actually saying law. Much like the Sahara Desert, where if you're saying Sahara Desert, you're actually saying desert. Once President Barack Obama approved a modified version of the Clinton Petraeus plan, Syria would plunge into the same abyss as jihadis funded by Saudi Arabia and the other oil monarchies spread sectarian violence and fear. Clinton's assumption that the U.S. could neatly and cleanly decapitate the Syrian government without having to worry about broader consequences little short of deluded. The notion that ordinary Syrians would fall to their knees in gratitude was ludicrous, while her disregard for the intricacies of Syrian politics was astonishing. Then there's the memo blithe suggestion that Washington work with regional allies like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to organize, train, and arm Syrian rebel forces. In late 2009, Clinton wrote in another diplomatic memo made public by WikiLeaks that donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. So what made her think 2 years later that the kingdom would not fund Syrian jihadis of precisely the same ilk? In 2009, memo slammed Qatar for allowing Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other terrorist groups to use the sheikdom as a fundraising locale So what made her think that a pro-Al-Qaeda autocracy would now help Syrians fight for their freedom? As the memo puts it, wouldn't Qatar be more likely to remove what little freedom Syrians had left? Of course it would. There is remarkable continuity between the Syria policy that Clinton was proposing and earlier policies in Afghanistan and Libya. In the first, U.S. military wound up flowing to the notorious warlord Gulbuddin Haqq-Matar, a religious sectarian and raging anti-Western xenophobe who nonetheless was the most efficient at killing Soviets, as Steve Cole put in The Ghost Wars, his best-selling 2004 account of the CIA's love with jihad. In short, she just destabilized the situation and made it worse with her warmongering. Are any of us really surprised? I will now play you a quick video concerning oh, sorry, not yet. Not yet. Vegans supposedly take more sick days according to British study. My thoughts. Well, they stated quite clearly that the number was something pretty ridiculous, and the correlation is hard to ignore. But as they say in the science field, correlation does not mean causation. Look, guess what? I'm a vegan. Dietary vegan. And you know what? I haven't been actually sick in a really long time. It's been a while. I think the last time I was sick at all with literally anything was 2016, I think? Like late 2016? I got sick and I was in bed from projectile vomiting, and for whatever reason I suddenly wanted to watch a bunch of Tim Curry movies. Not sure why that was about. I was suddenly obsessed with Tim Curry. I don't know, the guy just puts a smile on my face. But, bottom line is, here's the thing. If vegans are regularly getting sick, it's not because they're vegan, alright? That has nothing to do with it. It is because, like so many meat eaters, vegans also will eat more for flavor than nutrients. They'll eat shit that tastes good rather than stuff that's actually good for them. Right? It's the same old story, and unfortunately just the risk of that behavior happens to be greater when you're a vegan, which makes it all the more important. When you take subjective taste like that into effect, I mean, what the fuck ever. Eat what's good for you. That's all there is to it. That's all I think it is just these were vegans who ate more for the flavor of the food than the actual nutritional value. So they probably ate a lot of garbage. That's probably all it was. And it's probably a very simple answer to the question, and they're just overlooking it. But mostly the number of additional 6 days they were taking was like 5 more. So that is kind of alarming. But don't just blame it all on veganism. Think about it first. Like I said, I'm a vegan. I haven't been sick in a really long time. I occasionally get really exhausted, but that's mostly just due to my sleep habits. Because I like to stay up to like 4 a.m. in the morning because I don't like sleep. I really don't. I have a problem there. But, anyway, Roman Vasquez, a surgeon who stupidly removes a patient's kidney because he thought it was a tumor. Mostly because it was not in the right place. Now, see, there's a weird phenomenon among women where sometimes one of their kidneys can be lower down in the abdomen, more toward the cervix. And I'm not sure why that is exactly. It's an interesting phenomenon, but the kidney otherwise works perfectly well. And while she can live without that second kidney, They sliced it up and treated it like a tumor, so it's no longer functional, by the way. So, honestly, he thought it was a tumor because it wasn't in the right place, partly. Like, they were opening her up for some other thing. And then he thought it was a cancerous tumor. He would have realized if he just looked at her chart that he would have known better. So this guy's grossly incompetent. He was sued for $250,000 for taking out one of her organs and slicing it up like a piece of pie. Fucking bastard, man. He shouldn't be allowed to work as a doctor ever again. That is a level of gross incompetence that should end up resulting in him not having his license. Good Lord. Magnetic poles shifting once again. Modern technology in danger. Yeah, what we're basically looking at here is apparently magnetic poles regularly shift. This is a natural phenomenon. It happens quite often. But apparently now they're realizing it happens more often than we used to think. And modern technology is in danger because if the magnetic poles shift, the fields of the Earth will drift over major energy production areas. And this could cause trillions in damage. Trillions in dollars. Modern technology could suffer a great blow. Of course, they were saying something similar the last time it happened, and it didn't happen. And not to mention the fact that, you remember, in 2012, they were talking about a major solar flare that was going to interfere with radio transmission and satellites and whatnot, and it didn't. It fucking did not. I don't know what it is with these scientists, but sometimes when they discover something that sounds kind of scary, they sort of have themselves a little freak-out sesh and get everybody unnecessarily worried. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic. I will remain optimistic and confident that it's not going to be anything too serious. But at the same time, I will strongly consider the possibility that it could very well be something serious. I will take the reasonable route on this one. But it could potentially be a disaster. We'll just wait, and we'll just have to wait and see. It's not like there's anything we can do about it. Even if we could, the question would be, should we? It's a natural process, and we just stop fucking with nature like that. Anyway, what I thought was next earlier, what is actually next now. I'm going to play you a quick little video about a woman who, she was sex trafficked many years ago. She's an elite child sex ring survivor, and she's going to tell us her story.
To Germany, to a place there. And this is something I recently recovered. It explains a lot about things of my life, as any memory always does when it starts to fall into place, when the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. It certainly explains a lot, and then there's this healing that takes place, this integration that takes place that's very important for my well-being. I was there for a month, and so I'll briefly say that it was a kind of a training plus eugenics. It was a eugenics clinic.
What do you mean by eugenics in this particular case?
So I was shown a lot of videos or film, whatever. My eyes were pried open and I was made to watch. And I was made to watch people engaging in all kinds of sex acts. But I was made to watch their faces. And I was taught through, it was systematic, it was very well done in that sense that it was structured really well so that I could start to understand that certain physical features, like certain physical features are going to mean that for that man's genitals, for example. Or looking at certain physical features, like that's what that man likes sexually. So I could see from looking at someone's face what they like, and then looking at someone's body, what they like sexually, what they are about sexually, what they need sexually. So that was most of it. That was most of this training. So I watched was made to watch a lot of film. But I was also starting to understand because it was also true. So there's a correlation somehow between the way that the face develops and people's addictions and everything. All the trauma is actually all somehow expressed. It's all visible. We just don't usually look at it. We don't usually see it. So I was taught to see it.
So in this case, you feel like you're being brainwashed, but also you're getting to understand a deeper truth about what things mean when people have certain faces, reactions.
Yes, traits, like with the eyes especially.
Yeah. Around
the eyes especially, it really shows. Like if someone's addicted to sex, for example, there's certain creases that appear, and they're always the same. And when someone masturbates, for example, there's certain other type of crease that appears under the eyes. So you can see sex addiction very clearly, and then I was made to see all the differentiations of the different kinds of sexual addictions that people have, and because I was being trained to be a sex slave for the elite.
Yikes! This world can be a very sickening place, can it not? Wow! Woo! Apparently she escaped, though. I read the article beforehand. It didn't really say how exactly. I was supposed to, if you were able to see the full interview, that it would have been very forthcoming. Still, I mean... Damn. With that kind of level of detail she was talking about, there's no reason to doubt what she says. Anyway, that's it for Culture Shock today, folks. I'm out!